Hello and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I'm your host, John S. In today's episode, we'll speak with Dale K., who wrote a book about a book, the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, studying the big book from a secular perspective with Dale K. Hello, everybody, and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I am here today with Dale K., and Dale and I are going to be talking about the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Dale, how you doing?
Good. How are you, John?
I'm doing excellent. Having a very nice day. Been looking forward to this conversation. It's actually been a topic I've been thinking about for a long time. In fact, you could say I've been thinking about it for years. I think the big book. I have an interesting relationship with the big book. It's probably the one book that I've read more than any other piece of literature in my life, and that's not anything I'm necessarily proud of, but it's just how it turned out for me. You know, when I first came into Alcoholics Anonymous and when I was getting sober, I was shocked at the denial that I had about my drinking, about my alcoholism, and I wanted to find out what was wrong with me. And so I wanted to get this book. I wanted to figure it out. And I was a little disappointed when I got the book because it seemed like they weren't really giving me a clear-cut instruction of what to do. It took me a while to understand the sharing from experience. But I found that I thought I was going to take that book by myself, and I was going to go through it, and I was going to work the steps. And I found that I couldn't by myself. And so I got a sponsor that took me through it. And I went to a group that took the big book pretty seriously. And we studied it line by line, page by page. And I read it repeatedly. And I went through the steps that way. And that's how I took other people through the steps. But then something happened a few years ago. I realized I was an atheist. And I took another look at the big book from the perspective of an atheist. And it was a very interesting experience. I went through it again, line by line, and I tried to make sense of it as a non-believer. And I found it surprisingly easy for me to do. I was very comfortable. There were sections of it I had to rewrite completely, and there were other sections where I just had to cross out certain lines to make them work for me. So anyway, so I took my new perspective to my old home group, and it wasn't accepted. And people began using the big book as a weapon against me. And it got to the point where I was sick of the big book. I couldn't even stand to hear it read. And I didn't touch it for a while. But now, after having our agnostic group for 3 years, with a lot of newcomers who've never read the big book and don't really have an appreciation for what AA is and the history of AA, I'm starting to understand that the big book is literature that is important for somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous to know, whether they're a believer or not. And I wanted to talk to you, Dale, because I have a sense that you shared this feeling with me, and you've written a study guide for the big book for secular people. So why don't you share a little bit about how you feel about the big book and what you're doing today with it?
Okay. Well, I've sort of come at the big book somewhat like you, but I was in a different position when I got to AA. I was very much an atheist when I got here. A lot of people took pity on me for that, and somebody bought me the big book, and I looked at it, and I thought, okay, this is ridiculous. I was very much kind of rebellious about AA in general because although I knew I was an alcoholic, I had known I was an alcoholic for a long time, I did not believe that drinking was my problem. I thought I was just a little crazy. I had a lot of anxiety and stuff when I first got here, and my wife I had at the time was, threatening to take action and possibly have me committed and stuff like that. But I got here kind of like a roundabout way. I didn't have much money back then. This was like the 1980, I guess. And I decided to seek some mental help. And I went to this county-operated mental health facility, which would be free for me. And they told me that I needed to stay sober for 60 days before I could come back and begin treatments. And so that's how I got to AA. I didn't really want to be sober. I had no interest in giving up drinking. In spite of the fact that, I mean, I knew I was an alcoholic long before I ever got to AA. I mean, it was no great secret that I couldn't control my drinking. I normally passed out every night. I rarely went to bed. I just passed out wherever I was.
Yeah.
But anyway, I struggled a lot with AA for about 6 or 8 months. And then, I don't know, I guess I had some sort of an epiphany and realized that drinking really was my problem. And I wanted to get sober. And I threw myself at AA, and I felt very desperate. And they were all talking about God and everything. So I was like, okay, if that's the price I have to pay, okay, So I started really looking into God, if you will, and became quite curious. I was reading books by, I forget the author's name. He's quite popular around here. But about spiritual experiences. And somebody suggested that I might read the Bible, something I had never done. They said I had contempt prior to investigation. So I said, okay, well, I'll read the Bible. And it was, I found it to be quite horrific. I couldn't imagine how people actually believed all this stuff.
Sure. But
I had committed to reading it, so I kept going. I got to a place somewhere in the New Testament where it said that God was love. And those 3 words, God is love, just hit me like a brick. And, there was the light bulb over my head and everything, I'm sure. And I thought, okay, there it is. There's my higher power. I don't need God. I closed the book and put it down and never picked it up again. I was off and running. I found my higher power, which today I still call God, love. And that's kind of how I went at it. And, that was probably about a 2-year struggle in the beginning. I can even remember going to study groups about the Lord's Prayer. And although all the people there were AA members, it wasn't considered an AA meeting.
That's interesting. A study group specifically about the Lord's Prayer?
Yeah. And we were analyzing this thing, I mean, word by word. I mean, the first week, it was Our Father. Okay, what does that mean? I mean,
wow.
So you can imagine my desperation. An atheist is studying the Lord's Prayer in such detail. But anyway, that's how I kind of got to AA, and I realized that, I really was an atheist. I wasn't going to believe in God. That wasn't going to happen, in spite of the fact that I tried as much as possible. For many years in AA, for the first, half a dozen years, I really felt like an outsider. And I was going through my original big book, which is the 76th edition. And I have notes and stuff like that, and most of it is in the 4th chapter, and and I can see that I'm struggling with this notion of spirituality. And I was trying to figure this out. Okay, as an atheist, how do I get this stuff they get? And I don't think I ever really figured it out until, I'm not sure what year it was, probably around 87, 88. A guy came to this meeting and said that he was a member of the We Agnostics group that met on Friday night. And I'm like, what the hell is that? I mean, after the meeting, I almost tackled the guy to stop it. I'm like, you got to tell me about this. And so he was telling me about this meeting on Friday nights in Boca Raton, Florida, called We Agnostics. And so, of course, that Friday I went to the meeting. I was all hyped up about actually what I wanted to do. What I was expecting to do at the meeting was a lot of God bashing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I was kind of angry that this God guy made it so difficult for me to get sober.
Right.
I wanted to do some bashing,
Mm-hmm.
but that didn't happen. In fact, the first meeting I went to, the discussion subject was gratitude,
Mm-hmm.
and I was so pissed off. How dare you talk about gratitude? I've heard more meetings about gratitude than you can shake a stick at. I continued going to that meeting for like 25 years, and I stopped going to AA, or normal AA, if you
Right.
will. And that was the last time I looked at the big book also.
Wow.
At this meeting, you know, there was a variety of people. Some were very radical and hated AA and wanted nothing to do with the big book.
Mm-hmm.
Others were interpreting it for themselves, like myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing that. And like you, I didn't find it very hard to read around all these things, you know, and look for the deeper meaning.
Uh-huh.
I think most of the people that went there were like that, you know, but a lot of them were like in the middle. They weren't sure if they wanted this or not, you know. So anyway, fast forward, you know, 25 years, and I retired, and my wife and I moved up to this rural community, and there was nothing like my old We Agnostics meeting. So I started going to normal AA again, because I was like 60 miles away from the old meeting.
Mm-hmm.
It was a struggle.
Yeah.
I guess. But it was also good because I hadn't been to normal AA for so long. I was getting back into it, and I was seeing what it was like. I was hearing more about the big book. I was unfortunately hearing more about God and all this sort of stuff. But I'd been around long enough. I'd been sober long enough where it wasn't a significant problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I found one place that had a lot of old timers, a lot of guys that had more sobriety than me, which was very important to me because I hate being I don't know what you want to call it. I don't want to say the smartest guy in the room.
The person with the longest sobriety. Yeah.
You know, I'm not interested in being looked up to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more interested in learning.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I stuck with this meeting, and I still go there on Monday nights. But I was seeing a lot of dysfunction in AA. And I had heard about a agnostic meeting that wasn't too far away, about 20 miles away. And I went down there, and these people they were like coming off the walls.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know who these people were. They called themselves AA. The meeting didn't look anything like AA. They didn't talk about AA. Half the time, they weren't even talking about drinking.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what the hell is this? This is, there was as much dysfunction there, if not more, than what I was seeing in normal AA.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, this isn't right. There's no reason why an atheist or an agnostic shouldn't be able to just go to AA and be welcomed and all these kind of things that we seek. And it was about the same time that I started investigating the internet and social media and stuff like that. And the first thing, I realized that I'm not explaining it. It's kind of like I felt like we needed something. Local agnostic AA people needed something, and I wasn't sure exactly what. So I started looking around the internet, and I found somebody told me about AA Agnostica. In fact, it was a guy at the local AA intergroup office.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with the name Marnin. He was one of the people that wrote a story in the Grapevine issue
That's
back
right.
in October.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
He's a lifelong atheist from New York, has been down here for a long time. And I happened to stop into intergroup, and actually, quite honestly, I was looking for a gay AA meeting because I felt that they would be more welcoming to a non-believer.
Yeah.
I just felt they'd be more progressive. Mm-hmm. So I went there to get a where-and-when, and I started talking to Martin, who manned the phones there. Mm-hmm. And he told me about this AA Agnostica website. So I went there, and I emailed Roger something or another, asking him some questions about what I forget. Mm-hmm. But he came back with a suggestion that I join this a Facebook group. Mm-hmm. You know, the Watch Central Coffee House.
Oh, yeah.
All of a sudden, I was like, wow, there's all these people. Mm-hmm. I had no idea all you people existed. Yeah. Here I'd been going to agnostic meetings for 25 years and had no idea it was happening everywhere else. Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt like it was kind of like a new age of enlightenment. Mm-hmm. Like there was all these secular people coming together and rediscovering sobriety, and sharing ideas and all this stuff, and getting away from all the old religions and traditions and all those things that put so much constraint on thinking.
Well, you know what's interesting, Dale, is you were going to agnostic AA for like 25 years, and so it's been around forever. I mean, it's been around since 1975 anyway. So what I learned from talking to Pam W., who was one of the founders of WAFTIAC, she said that when she and Dorothy were in LA, in Hollywood, going to their meeting, the We Agnostics group there, they had no idea that there were other agnostic groups around the country. And they were sitting around wondering, they'd have these newcomers come to their meeting, and and the newcomers would talk about how much they liked it. And Pam and Dorothy would ask one another if they could possibly be the only group like that. And so they started looking, and they found that all these other groups, Chicago, Toronto, all over the place. And so as it turns out, all these, we were so desperate. We had groups in Florida, we had groups in New York, we had groups in Chicago, we had groups in LA, but they didn't really connect with each other. They didn't know about one another. So that convention brought them all together. And then after the convention, we got into the social media together. And ever since then, it's just been, like you said, it's been a renaissance of AA. So many of us have gotten so excited. And that's why all these meetings, start growing from there too. So it's kind of interesting.
Now I have one here about 8-10 miles away that just got started last year, and so I've got another We Agnostics meeting to go to. It, the growth of it is almost ridiculous.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I mean, before the internet, we had no idea. Communications were slow. Trying to find like-minded people in other places was this side of impossible. Anytime I traveled, I might go to a meeting, but it would just be a normal meeting.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd never ran into any other agnostic meetings, but now that communication is so much easier, it's exploding.
Yeah.
We're finding out that all these other people exist, and
people are finding out.
It's just this watershed of secular thinking in AA, and it's so heartwarming to know that you're all out there.
Yeah.
And we don't have to be alone anymore.
No. So, getting back to the big book, when you started going back to agnostic AA again. And is this when you decided that you wanted to take a second look at the big book, or?
I'll tell you what happened. At my normal AA meeting on Monday night, a guy came in and he made an announcement about a new clubhouse that was down in this town just south of me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a AA club kind of person. I've always kind of avoided them. But I was in the area one day and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to drive by and see where this place is, what it looks like. So I stopped and I looked in the window and I was like, oh my God, there are people in there. And the door was open. So I went in and found myself in a big book meeting. Mm-hmm. And I sat down quietly and listened. And I thought, well, okay, this is great. And there was a guy from my Monday meeting that was there. He's an old timer. He just celebrated his 50th year of sobriety. Mm-hmm. And I have always enjoyed what he has to say. He's very calm and very serene, and I just enjoy him. And he was there, and we talked a little bit, and he said he was, a regular. And so I decided to go back just because he was there. And I dusted off my old big book and went to the meeting next week. Mm-hmm. They started reading, and I forget where they were at, but obviously they weren't in the first 164 because they were reading something different. Uh-huh. They were on a different page, and it was different. And so I asked about that, and they were like, oh, we're reading from the 4th edition. Uh-huh. And I was like, really? They got a new edition? I had no idea, and that's how isolated I was from normal AA. I was like 12 years late finding out that they had a new edition of the big book. And I was quite excited to buy this new edition and see what the differences was. So I brought one home, and I was, the first thing I did when I got home was just sit at the table and start comparing. Mm-hmm. I found myself quite disappointed because the meat of the book hadn't changed at all. Yeah. They had a forward to the 4th edition, and they had different stories. None of the stories were written by atheists. Mm-hmm. There's one guy who says he's agnostic, but he's not sure. Right. But I thought, damn it, they had a chance to fix this thing, and they didn't do anything. They totally dropped the ball, I think, or I thought. I still believe they did, but and I was really quite angry about it. Mm-hmm. And that's when I decided that, seeing all of the dysfunction in AA and in the agnostic groups, and this book that refuses to change, mm-hmm. I thought, you know what, I need to write a book. And so I started, and I didn't even know what I was going to write. So I got back into the big book, and quite honestly, I got to tell you, I feel that the big book is very important text. Mm-hmm. And now that I've, read it several times here recently, I see things very differently than I did 30 years ago. Yeah. And I really enjoy this new perspective that I have. I think it's a more mature perspective. And I'm finding more value to it today than, in spite of the fact that it hasn't changed. Sure. I find more value in it today than I ever did. So why do you think it's important? When I was young and desperate. Why do you think it's important? Well, because it lays out the program of AA. Mm-hmm. There are several different programs, if you will, to get sober. AA is not the only thing. Sure. But it's one of those things. Right. And this is the program of AA. And And if this is what you want, then you should be reading this book to find out what they're suggesting you do. Now, here's the trick. I agree with you on that. I think that
I think it's important for two reasons. Number one, you're right. The program is in this book. If you want to go through the steps, this is what you want to read. You and the 12 and 12 too, I would say, but this is what you want to read. But also to understand the history behind the fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous and the culture of AA. You should know the book.
Sure.
What I would caution people, though, is there's a lot of people out there that are really dogmatic about the book. They don't want to change it. I don't want to change it, but I want to keep it in the context of its time and respect that and respect the people who wrote it because they wrote it for their generation. They wrote it for their times. That doesn't mean that it's useless for us in our times, but it doesn't mean that we have to swallow it whole either. And the people who wrote it some 80 years ago, they wouldn't want us to.
Yeah. I'm not sure that the original authors intended it for it to be completely unchanged forever.
No, I agree with you.
And if they were here today, I think they would look back and say, for the time it was written, it was a wonderful text, and they probably look at it and go, how the hell did we ever write such a good book?
Yeah.
Kind of amazing themselves looking back at it.
Yeah.
But then they would also say, but it's not current. It doesn't speak to the newcomer anymore.
Right.
When you start a chapter with the words "our women folk,"
right?
What does that say?
Right.
If I was a strong feminist with those words, I'd be tossing it in the trash.
Yeah. Well, what's funny too is, in AA, the General Service Conference does update its service manual to have more modern language. And they did this not too long ago. I was at an area assembly where our delegate came back from New York, and he talked about some changes that were made to the service, the General Service manual. And the language, what they were changing was the way that women were being referred to as just being helpers in the office or secretaries and that kind of thing, And they had it was sexist language they had to get rid of, And they did that, but they aren't going to do that in the big book.
Yeah. And when you read the chapter to the wives, and you realize just how misogynistic all this is, it's. I don't mean to be critical, because the ones that wrote that back then, they didn't know that women could be alcoholics.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
The man was the breadwinner.
Yeah.
It was a different time, and they wrote that. But today it just doesn't apply anymore.
No.
So to hold this book as historical is important.
Yes, I agree.
But to update it and to make it speak to newcomers, I think is critical. And the longer they don't do it, I think they're killing people.
Yeah, I do too.
Quite honestly,
it's ridiculous. It's horrible when younger people. In my generation, I was born years after this book was written, but I was kind of familiar with that kind of verbiage and that kind of language, It wasn't that far from the 1950s, I guess. So when I was a kid growing up, I might have read things written in the 40s and the 50s. So it wasn't that unusual to me. But someone that's coming into the program now who might be 25 or 30 years old, this is ridiculous reading. You know what I'm saying?
It is.
It's nothing. It's nothing they've ever encountered.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think those that do get into the program and get past it are exceptional. The ones that are secular and find us, our meeting, they pretty much reject it.
Mm-hmm. They do, and
they go, "Okay, this is trash."
Yeah.
Because we criticize it all the time.
We do, and just did.
They go, okay, well, I don't know what that is, but I'm pretty sure it's not for me.
Right.
So they ignore it, and all they get, the only experience they have, is whatever is shared at meetings.
Right.
And I think that's a shame, quite honestly. I see a lot of, well, I don't go to a lot of agnostic meetings,
No.
but I feel like a lot of them are going in a direction that is 180 degrees away from AA.
Well, here's why, though.
And
the book doesn't work for us. Here's the thing: the book doesn't work for us if we're reading it literally, if we're reading it as if it must be followed. If we were to study it as literature in the context of its time and draw from it and put it in our own context, then it would be useful for us. But I think what happens, a lot of us who are going to agnostic meetings came from traditional AA, and we may have been getting beat up by this book. And then by the time we get into our agnostic groups, we don't want anything to do with it. I mean, it'd be really difficult for us at a meeting where we have people that come to our group who've either been harmed by religion or maybe harassed by AA or whatever, and to have to read this. But I do think it's possible for us secular atheists, agnostics, free thinkers, whatever, to study the thing. And I kind of like your idea of a study guide to help people do that.
Yeah, but you know what? I think that's a wonderful idea, having a workbook thing where you can compare what I've done to the big book and all this sort of thing. But if I'm really honest with myself, I have to believe that people aren't going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
People, they just give it to me. Don't make me study. Don't make me work for this.
Right.
Just give it to me.
And part of it too is it's really difficult. I mean, when I went through this thing from a new perspective, it wasn't difficult for me to interpret it in a secular way because I had spent 25 years reading it, and I'd spent all that time in AA. So I was already immersed in AA culture. So it wasn't difficult for me. But a newcomer, it would be very, very difficult for them. If you don't understand AA history, if you haven't studied the book or worked the steps or gone through the program, whatever, it's going to be really difficult for you to do it. And that's why I think
coming in with different attitudes towards religion today, too.
That's true, too.
A lot of people, I'm 67.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people around my age grew up with religion. We kind of get it. We understand it. We know why people do it and all this. We may have rejected it, but a lot of these newer people have not grown up with religion. My children haven't grown up with religion.
Right.
They're in their 30s now, and a prime age for coming into AA. And so when these new people come into AA today, they see this and they go, I guess that doesn't apply to me. And they reject it. And that's a shame because...
They do that with the big book. They do it with the steps. When they see the steps on the wall covered with God, they reject them outright because it's hard. It's hard to use your imagination and say, okay, how can I apply that to my worldview? Instead you just look at it and say, oh, that's ridiculous. I'm just no God that's going to do anything for me. But you know what? The bottom line,
you just get very critical about it. And, and so many of these people, they need something else. And that's why I wrote this book. And that's why when I found out that the first 164 pages were in the public domain,
mm-hmm.
I went, hey, I'm going to rewrite it. I'm not waiting for general services,
right,
or AA World Services to change this. People are dying. We need something, that these people can read and actually think it applies to them.
Yeah. So, what kind of approach do you take with your book? How do you take people through it?
Well, in rewriting the 164 pages, you don't get the full 164 because the first part of it is Bill's story,
mm-hmm.
and I have no interest in changing Bill's story.
Right.
It's his story. I have my story. I wouldn't want anybody to change mine either.
Right.
So you only get 137 pages.
Right.
But I don't want to take a radical step away from what the text the original text is. And in fact, I probably use 90% of the original text. And I just changed things around a little bit so that when they talk about God or whatever, that it says it in a way that makes sense to secular people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I left in all the references to spiritual
Mm-hmm.
things because I'm not that fond of the term,
Mm-hmm.
but it has become something very different to so many different people.
Mm-hmm.
The definition of it has broadened tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
I decided, okay, I'm going to leave this in,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because if I take it out, it's going to eliminate a lot of people who like it. And I think that what I've done, you know, even if you're a radical, free-thinking atheist,
Mm-hmm.
intellectual that wants nothing to do with all this stuff and think it's silly,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to appreciate what I've done much more than what you would the original text. So, you know, it's just, it's something that you can read and think it actually applies to you.
Right.
And I also took the opportunity to remove all the gender issues,
Okay.
you know, the misogynistic, paternalistic attitudes
Uh-huh.
that it has, and tried to keep it gender neutral.
Uh-huh.
Of course, you know, if you're into Bill's story, if you're
Sure.
talking about that section that speaks about how Bill found Bob and
Mm-hmm.
they found the third guy and the
Mm-hmm.
fourth guy, we leave all that the way it is because they're talking about specific individuals
Right.
and there's no reason to change their gender.
Right. But to talk
My
about the
chapter-
alcoholic and the wife or something like that.
My chapter, Two Wives,
Uh-huh.
has been retitled Two Spouses,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that it's women can read it also and say, hey, this applies to me. You know, it's not just a bunch of macho assholes writing, you know, about stuff that doesn't apply.
I think you could do the same thing too with the belief part when it comes to non-believers and believers. I think that, like, for example, when I went through this, I rewrote the chapter to the agnostics, and I wrote it in a way that it could be used by both the non-believer and the believer. So in other words, I wrote it as a real agnostic, and I would say, okay, we honor and respect the experience of those who believe or
Yes.
whatever. But this is our experience. And what I find anyway, when I look at the big book, is the only different is the belief. The action is the same. And all the belief is what you think is empowering you to do those things, right?
Right. And honestly, those beliefs are irrelevant.
They're irrelevant. That drives me crazy.
And that's how I sort of take the rewriting is right down the middle of the road. If you were the Pope, you could read this and go, wow, that makes good sense.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, or if you were a radical atheist, you could read it and say,
yeah,
that makes good sense.
If you talk about what you do, if you talk about the actions, this is how I see the whole program. Really, it's experience and action. Belief is immaterial.
Yeah,
you can believe.
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, I guess I have a belief. My belief is that it's other people in AA that empower me. I guess that support me. That help make it easier for me to do these things. So if you want to call that a quote higher power, that's fine. But so what? Someone else might think that Jesus Christ is that power that helps make it easier for them to do that. So what? The bottom line is both of us are doing something.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing I do with the book is that besides rewriting those first 164 is that I break down the two facets of the program or of Alcoholics Anonymous. What I consider the fellowship and the program.
Yeah.
You know, two different facets.
Yeah, I'm starting to make that distinction now too. I'm starting to get it. Yeah. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fellowship is to me is more important than the program.
Yeah.
You know, when I was
AA is a fellowship with a program. is what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I was drinking, I had no friends. I was a prick, quite honestly. And my friends had deserted me. I sit in meetings, I hear people talk about how when they stop drinking, their drinking buddies stop coming around anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always thought, I lost my drinking buddy way before I ever
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to drink with me anymore. But it was very important to me to find this fellowship. I cherish it. I on Mondays before I go to my AA meeting, I have dinner with 4 or 5 guys, and then we go to the meeting. And I think it's more important that I go to that dinner than to the meeting. Just to have that social part of it. Feel, that sense of belonging. It's the same thing that religious people do. I know people that aren't religious and they go to church because they want that sense of belonging.
That's right.
So they just go and kind of pretend because it feels good.
Sure.
So I lay that out and I explain how that works and what the benefits of fellowship are and how you can make that work for you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also go into the program, the 12 steps, how it works. This is what we do. And I know that a lot of people in secular AA don't get that program thing. It's not a moral problem.
Some reject it completely.
It's a moral problem, so it shouldn't have a moral answer.
Right.
Well, my argument is that, it may not have a moral answer, but if I become a better person, I feel better about myself. And it makes it easier for me to stay sober because I don't need to hide my reality anymore.
Right.
I don't need to drown myself in booze and lie to the bartender about who I am because I don't like myself.
Right.
When you start liking yourself a little bit, it makes sobriety so much easier.
Yeah.
So there's that component.
I thought it was brilliant, actually, when, like I told you when I started out, when I was very first getting sober, I was shocked that I was lying to myself for so many years because I was this guy who said I can get it all under control. That just totally denied I had a problem. And so it really frightened me that I could lie to myself and deceive myself to such an extent. So for me, the self-honesty in the steps was really important, and to get down to be really honest with myself in steps 4 and 5. That was just really important because I needed to know the truth about myself. That was just maybe some people don't need that, but for me it got me centered. And plus I also think
absolutely
the whole idea of I drank. I believe what Dr. Silkworth said. I buy that. I drank because I liked the way it made me feel. I drank for the effect, and I drank because I needed to change the way I felt. And there was something emotionally going on with me, and I think the steps kind of help uncover that emotional stuff. I go back into my life and I talk to another human being about it, and I realize that, I'm not alone. I'm not different. It just makes a huge difference for me. But I guess I can respect people for whom that isn't so important, but I thought it was pretty brilliant. So,
every one of us comes to this sobriety thing in a different way.
Yeah.
And, we all take a little bit of this and that, and whatever works for you is what you should do.
That's right.
And so, I don't mean to push AA or the program or the fellowship, but I want to explain that it works for me, and that here it is. This is what AA is. If you're not interested in AA, there's no reason to be here. But, there's other programs, you can go to SOS and all sorts of stuff, But, I've got a brother that has been sober for about 25 years, and he's never stepped foot in AA.
Mm-hmm.
He just decided that he was done, and he was done.
Yeah.
And he's a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
maybe he didn't need the program because he was already a nice guy.
Right. So tell me,
I don't know.
what do you plan for your book? Is it done? I mean, I read I think the first incarnation of it. I didn't read your revised version yet.
Oh.
But do you have it? Are you happy with it now where you've got it?
I am. I've kind of been putting the final touches on it this afternoon, actually.
Uh-huh.
And I will probably, it's got to run through the editor.
Right.
Because I probably didn't catch all the he's and the him's and the.
Yeah, you definitely need that. Yeah.
The husband and.
Yeah, it's.
I actually, changing the God part was easy.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started doing all the gender stuff, I was like, oh my God, I wasn't even paying attention before.
Yeah. But
when you actually start looking at it, it's like, wow, and so I'm sure that I missed some of all those gender issues, you know, and so it has to go through the editing process, one more time, and then I have some stories that some secular stories that I'm going to put on the back of it, just like the big book, and then we're going to put it to the publisher.
Good. Well, that's exciting.
So I would suspect that by the summer it'll be available.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, cool. That's exciting. Have you written a book before?
I haven't written an entire book, no. Ever since I found the computer, I was a businessman and I had my own business, and I was kind of forced into the computer back in the 90s. Yeah. And I found out that I enjoy writing, mainly because I get to correct myself. You know how you have a conversation with somebody, and the next day you go, damn, I should have said that. Yeah. If only I'd have said this, that would have put him in his place. Well, as a writer, you get to do that. Yeah. You get to correct yourself all the time. And you can fine tune your words. You can do all that wordsmithing and make it exactly the way you want it before somebody sees it. Right. So I really do enjoy it, and I sort of get lost in it. I've written some short stories. I've written some poetry. But this nonfiction thing is something new to me. Everything else was fiction or kind of biographical, if you will. So this is a little new to me, but it's been an absolute joy doing it. And quite honestly, I know that when I get done with it, I'm going to miss it. Yeah. Well, I look forward for it being ready, and we'll have you back on again to talk about it when it's ready, and to, have it featured on the site. And I'm sure that it'll be on Amazon and so forth. Yeah. So, yeah, that's great. And it's something that's, I think is needed. And people are looking for it, actually. I mean, there's a lot of people, that come to an agnostic meeting, or they're a non-believer, and they want the experience of the program and of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's difficult for them to try to figure out on their own. And a book like that is really very useful. So, I think it's a good thing. I think it'll help a lot of people. Yeah. Well, I hope it's timely, and I hope it's appreciated. Yeah. I did it because I feel that there's a lot of newcomers that need to have more exposure to the big book. Yeah. And I think so. That's what I hope I'm accomplishing. Well, good. I think you will, and I agree with you. Well, thank you, Dale. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. It's been a pleasure. Okay. Well, thank you, John. It's been a pleasure myself. All right. Take care. Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back soon enough with another episode for your listening pleasure. Until then, don't drink, go to meetings, and help others.